Hello everyone, Tom with Capo Fetish. All right, today we're going to continue with our little mini LA series, and today I'm going to present some life-changing sophomore albums from LA artists. These albums have been, most of these albums have been part of my DNA from day one, except maybe about one or two, but here we go, folks. I'm going to count down. I'm not going to count down anything. These are just going to be random, and I'm just going to throw them out here. But I'm going to start off with one album here, though, that is probably the earliest memory I ever had of listening to music. And along with like Whipped Cream by Herb Alpert and maybe the Help soundtrack, the Beatles, this album too was probably one of the earliest albums I ever heard in my life, and that is the Byrds' Turn, Turn, Turn. This album was played to death for a couple of years there as I was walking around in diapers and growing into a toddler. And it blew me away even at this very early age. Just hearing a lot of the 60s music played all the time in the front living room. We had 45s being played by my brother and sister constantly. We had these albums being played constantly. And eventually it's going to get in your DNA, right? So the first time I ever heard the Byrds was this particular album. I think we had the Mr. Tambourine Man single. We did. With I Knew I'd Want You on the flip side. But this was the first Byrds album I ever heard. So, I mean, maybe not as just solid as Mr. Tambourine Man, but it is just nearly perfect, all right? The title track is phenomenal, right? Gene Clark just contributing some just phenomenal tracks on here. Set You Free This Time. The track that starts off side 2, The World Turns All Around Her. These are just incredible songs. If You're Gone. And then they do some great covers. They do, I think, in my opinion, the greatest version of Satisfied Mind. And it's because of those timeless Byrd harmonies. I mean, they just lift the song into the stratosphere on Satisfied Mind. Incredible. They do a version of Oh, Susanna that ends the album. I love their cover of The Times They Are A-Changin' by Dylan. But my favorite Dylan cover on here is Lay Down Your Weary Tune. The way McGuinn's guitar sounds on that with those harmonies, it's just absolute magic. And then the only track they played at the Monterey Pop Festival, he was a friend of mine on here, and acoustic-based. Probably the first time the Byrds kind of had an acoustic-based track. So really, really, really great stuff here. And definitely in my DNA, and definitely a life-changing album. The Byrds' Turn, Turn, Turn from '65. Let's move on to 1970, an album I heard by my brother, my two sisters. I was listening to this album pretty much throughout the first half of the 70s. It was constantly being played on the living room stereo. I mean, what an absolute gem of an album. I mean, from start to finish, the melodies, James Taylor's warm, earthy voice. It's just so friggin' good. Sweet Baby James, the title track. My favorite tracks on here, my personal favorite ones that really get me when I hear this album, Suite for 20G, the last track. That melody, and it's like a 3-part tune, kind of ends up being like this kind of rhythm and blues track towards the end on the coda. I love Blossom. I think has this great like Beatlesque melody to it. Sunny Skies is so uplifting. Lo and Behold. I mean, I could just go on and on. Country Road, just a classic. Fire and Rain, of course, big hit. Anywhere Like Heaven with that really cool steel guitar. I mean, this is just one of the great singer-songwriter albums of all time. And along with Blue by Joni Mitchell, After the Gold Rush, and Carole King Tapestry. I mean, those albums were just played nonstop in our house in the early 70s, and they are always with me forever. I love these albums. Sweet Baby James, his second album, sophomore album, released in 70. His first one was the self-titled on Apple Records in 68. Let's go forward to 1981, a band, as soon as I heard them, I'm like, I got to get this album. But this wasn't the album. This is their second album. Wild Gift by X is an absolute perfect rock and roll record. I think of it more of a rock and roll record than a punk record. Of course, there's elements of punk. We're Desperate. I mean, that's like really, really like such a classic. But then you have like new musical ideas coming into the band on this album, as opposed to Los Angeles. You've got kind of rockabilly stuff, kind of old 50s rockabilly stuff like Adult Books, which he had previously released a year or two prior on a single, an indie single. You've got kind of that kind of twang on the Once Over Twice. one of the greatest singles of the 1980s, White Girl. I mean, we talk about an absolute perfect track. And of course, a lot of what draws me into X, which I've told in the past, is that I just love the harmonies of Exene and John Doe. They remind me a lot of Jefferson Airplane, Paul Kantner, and Grace Slick. I think it's just fantastic. First time I heard Los Angeles at Moby Disc in 1980, I was like, I got to get this album immediately. I mean, it just drew me in immediately, the harmonies. And then, of course, Billy Zoom's just amazing guitar playing. And DJ Bone Breaks, just solid drumming. So many great tracks. Another like kind of rockabilly tune with that really cool opening by Billy Zoom, Beyond and Back, which was featured in the Erg movie. Back to the Bass. I love when I love Passed Out on the Couch and the year one ends the album. Just an absolute perfect album. I love the way Ray Manzarek produced this album. It's kind of lo-fi. A lot of the albums that came out of LA back then were very kind of lo-fi punk records and new wave records, but I love the way this album is sequenced. It's just, I couldn't imagine the sequence being any other way. It's absolutely perfect from start to finish. One of my favorite albums of all time, and an album I still play to this day. X Wild Gift from 1981. An album I featured a lot through the past couple of years, but I got to feature it again. I just really recently mentioned it in a Power Pop video. Emitt Rhodes' debut album, or Emitt Rhodes' second album, sorry about that, his sophomore album. I think the first one was called American Dream and featured some like leftover cuts from the merry-go-round and a couple of solo cuts. But this is just a fantastic, self-made, produced album by Emitt Rhodes. He plays all the instruments on it, drums, guitar, bass, you know it. Very raw, very authentic, incredible songwriter. This is the album that Paul McCartney should have released in 1970. Though that album had some choice cuts, this is way more solid. With My Face on the Floor starts side one. Great pop track. Just one great track after another. She's Such a Beauty. Lullaby going into Fresh as a Daisy is just fantastic with that piano that starts Fresh as a Daisy. My favorite track on here, Long Time No See, with that kind of sinister guitar line, is so good. Live Till You Die. You Take the Dark Out of the Night. Ever Find Yourself Running? You Should Be Ashamed. Something Made for Me. It's just a classic pop record by Emitt Rhodes. We lost him a couple years ago. I love his stuff with the merry-go-round. Love this record. Played it to death, and it was another record that was played in the front living room growing up. And I remember just being very attracted to the melodies of this album. Emitt Rhodes, self-titled album, sophomore album from 70. One of my favorite albums of all time. I think one of the greatest albums from the 60s. Very eclectic. One of the great bands that ever came out of LA. I'm talking about Buffalo Springfield and their second sophomore album, Buffalo Springfield Again. You could kind of tell at this point with Buffalo Springfield, they were kind of splintering a little bit. It's not as, you don't find that cohesive vibe as you do on the first album. It sounds more like a live band, like that's kind of the repertoire they were doing at the time. Here they're experimenting. Everybody's got their own thing going on. It's kind of like a mini White Album. The three principal songwriters are cranking out some of their best songs of this period. Mr. Soul, Expecting to Fly, and Broken Arrow are absolute masterpiece tracks from Neil Young. When I saw the Buffalo Springfield reunion in 2011 and they played Broken Arrow, it sounded so incredible. Stephen Stills delivers three amazing tracks on here. The incredible Bluebird, Hung Upside Down, which I think is a real underrated Buffalo Springfield track. And then, of course, Rock and Roll Woman with those incredible harmonies. And then even Richie Furay pulls off a couple of doozies, too, with A Child's Claim to Fame, which is one of the early kind of samples of country rock, and it's done so well. I don't know who's playing the solo in the middle, but it's fantastic, just timeless. And then a very moody track called Sad Memory. And then you've got Dewey Martin, the drummer, doing his best Otis Redding on Good Time Boy. It all flows really well together. It's very eclectic. And by the way, I forgot another great Stephen Stills track on here, Every Days, which has this very kind of low-key, kind of lounge vibe, with Neil Young doing this distorted sustain throughout the track. An absolute masterpiece of an album, and one of the best sophomore albums, not only of the LA scene, but of all time, in my opinion. So Buffalo Springfield Again from 67. Here's an album that my sister, she told me this story. My sister told me this story, that she won this album at a church raffle or a church carnival type thing. I think it was a raffle, right? So the album that she won initially was Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones, but my mom saw the cover, and my mom's like, I don't think you should keep that. And then why don't you return that to the church and trade it for something else? So this is the album that my sister exchanged for the Sticky Fingers album, and it is Carole King's Tapestry, and this is another just absolute life-changing album, another album played in the front living room time and time again when I was in kindergarten, first grade. I mean, it's just, I mean, these songs are just in my head forever. I Feel the Earth Move, So Far Away. I think one of the greatest pop songs ever written, It's Too Late. The sentiment, the arrangement, that sax solo in the middle, that really dry guitar. I mean, her vocals, I just love Carole King's vocals. Very earthy and passionate. You've got Way Over Yonder, Beautiful, Home Again. You got You've Got a Friend. I love her version of You Got a Friend, and her version of You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. The title track, Smackwater Jack, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, her solo rendition of it, Where You Lead. I mean, it's a perfect album. Perfect album. It's no wonder why it sold millions of copies. It's infectious. It's life-affirming. It's fantastic. And it's an absolute life-changing album. Sophomore album from LA for me. From 1971, Carole King's Tapestry. My favorite album by this group, I'm sure I've probably held this album out more than any other album on this channel, I think. And it's one of my, I think it's probably, no, it is in my top 10 albums of all time. And it is Strange Days by The Doors. I think this captures The Doors at their early peak. I think Jim Morrison's vocal is at a peak here in his earliest form. The songs are all incredibly magical. The Strange Days, the title track with that really cool effect. This is just an incredible psychedelic album. Love Me Two Times, written by Robbie Krieger, as well as Your Lost Little Girl, which is one of my all-time favorite Doors songs, featuring just, I think, Jim Morrison at his crooning best. Such an incredible vocal. A song that's not really talked about very often, Unhappy Girl, just great pop from The Doors. The Doors could do it all. Then the Horse Latitudes poem going into Moonlight Drive, Pure Magic. Side 2 is just pure magic. People Are Strange, another 2 songs in a row, 2 of my absolute favorite Doors songs ever. My Eyes Have Seen You, and I Can't See Your Face in My Mind, with that really cool marimba, I think that's what it is. That kind of loungy, kind of Tropicana kind of vibe. And then, of course, one of the greatest endings to any album ever, When the Music's Over. It's just a masterpiece. The Doors, Strange Days from 1967, one of my favorite albums of all time, and one of my favorite life-changing sophomore albums. An artist I only got into about 5 years ago, but my God, these 2 albums she put out in her lifetime blew me away upon first listen. I love her first album. It's now becoming one of my favorite albums of all time. I love her second album, Heart Food by Judy Sill. She's kind of, this is a little different than the first album. She's kind of adding more elements, a little more complex arrangements. You've got the album starting off with There's a Rugged Road, which I think Sean Cole had covered. If I'm mistaken, please let me know. The Kiss, which is now becoming like this really, big thing, right? It's been featured, I think her version on the Old Grey Whistle Test, that particular video now is over 500,000 or 750,000 views, which is just incredible for somebody that never got hardly any notice back in the early 70s. There's a track on here called The Pearl, which was supposed to be released on her first album. There's an early rendition of it on that 2 CD compilation from Rhino, which is really outstanding. Down Where the Valleys Are Low and The Vigilante, and side 1. Just really good stuff. Side 2, Soldier of the Heart is great. And The Phoenix is amazing. And When the Bridegroom Comes, so soulful. But the track on here that really, really blows me away is The Donor. When this video is over, you need to pull this track up online with headphones and hear this track. It's like about 8-9 minutes long, and it's all like kind of mainly a cappella. Sounds like you're in church with just this incredible vibe going on. I mean, it's really hard to explain. It's transcendent. It's amazing. It's called The Donor. Pull it up on YouTube if you've never heard it, and just kind of relax and put on the headphones. You'll be blown away about with what is going on in that track. It's just unreal. I've never really heard a track like that. So, you know, I've only been into Judy Sill for about 5 years, but it's absolutely been life-changing. It's almost like discovering something new that's like 50 years old. And I love discovering something old that I've never heard before. And it sounds really fresh and timeless. Judy Sill, amazing. And if you've never seen her documentary, I forgot what it's called now. Can't think about what the title is. But I saw it a few months ago. It was outstanding. Check it out. Judy Sill, Heart Food, another great sophomore album. I mentioned this album too a lot, along with Strange Days over the past couple of years. But I have to. It's just phenomenal. To Capo from Love. You know, I don't really like the second side. It's just a jam, but it doesn't matter because the first side is so incredible. It's worth the price of admission. I mean, to me, these 6 songs on side 1 of Da Capo, I think are probably some of my absolute favorite Love tracks. I mean, these are just incredible tracks. Stephanie Knows Who, Orange Skies, which was written by Brian McLean, sung by Arthur Lee. Such a beautiful track with that kind of flute solo in the middle. Que Vida, completely different track. 7 and 7 Is probably the earliest I remember of playing a 45 as a child. The 7 and 7 Is track. On the flip side, number 14. The Castle is absolutely incredible, and then it ends and She Comes in Colors. Those 6 songs, there's so much stylistic range. You can kind of see where they were going with the third album, Forever Changes. I mean, they're just really, really progressing fast from the first album. The first album was more kind of birdsy, more chimey. This has everything just on side 1 alone. It's just incredible stuff. So yeah, definitely a life changer here. Love in general, life changing. Da Capo from 1967. And then last on the list is the second album by Jackson Browne, For Every Man. This is another one I grew up with listening to as a child, nonstop from brother and sisters. I love his version of Take It Easy more than the Eagles. I love how the way Take It Easy segues into Our Lady of the Well. His version of These Days is still my favorite. I've heard Nico's, I've heard Greg Allman's. I haven't heard Tom Rush's version, but compared to the few versions I've heard, I still love Jackson Browne's These Days, and it's absolutely incredible that he wrote that at 16 years old. Redneck Friend, featuring some incredible slide guitar by David Lindley. And David Lindley's all over this. Slide guitar, lead guitar, electric fiddle. All over the album, just really adding some really cool elements. Ready or Not's a great track. The title track, it's all fantastic. And just want to apologize. I meant to include Late for the Sky in my previous video, but I spaced out and forgot to pull it off the shelf. And the ironic thing about it is that was one of the first albums I wanted to feature on that last video of third stellar albums by singer-songwriters from LA. But anyway, I had to make sure this was in here because I love Jackson Browne's first 3 albums. Very important stuff for me growing up. So there you go, folks. Do you have any more to add to the list? Great sophomore albums from LA. Let me know in the comments section. As always, thanks for watching. If you dig the content on the channel, just press subscribe. It's free. No big whoop. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.